mani padme hum, mani padme hum, mani padme hum, mani padme hum, mani.
Good morning.
Good morning.
That is it. So page number 16 things. Dark Hishi Jibber John me as Dala Dahin our China young, needed a full of machine to upper the sailor.
So now we're on number 16 of the practice. And so of the 37 Bodhisattva practices, sorry. So it says, even if someone for whom one has cared as lovingly as one's own child regards one as an enemy, to cherish that person as dearly as a mother does an ailing child is the Bodhisattva's practice. And then an alternate translation is, even if a person I've dearly nurtured like my own child should view me as an enemy, to love them even more as a mother does a child stricken with illness is the Bodhisattva's practice.
That's it. Tilly, Matodala, that Jibber John was it. Round Bay, Kasi Yabochi, some rating, Sola Yapomaji, your is in a chita, go 100% more person at chita, Jacha, Jachundo, Ola, Carsena, Pujacha Jachu, Buchilla, Hariabochivina, Sola Yabochigri. In a young, like a Kashi, in a young, which Halaya Chibi nothing, Sola Yabu Majinka, the your is. You're not young, something else to him. Kundo Sayanda or Tila, Tanya Sajil, Kundo Savilo. Gahipe Gangi the Casina, Choshen, Cassi Machita, Karina Karikangi, Yorwa, Gangi Yodu. In a Gangi Yosati, Yotilatini, Chip Moneta, Rank Yana, Casetta Dances on in the day, Karina Trigelatini, Composadeo. Tanya Zadel, the Combo, Lelo in the Sade. Yes.
So sometimes it can be the case that even if we have really done everything that we can to care for someone, to treat them well, sometimes no matter how much we've done to help or benefit someone else, then in return, they might respond to our kindness even with hostility. So what even though we are giving something positive, sometimes from that individual, what we receive is negativity or hostility in return. But that's not, sometimes it happens like that, but really, actually, most often we kind of get we receive what we put out. And so 80% or 90% of the time, when we treat others well, when we are kind and loving and caring toward others, then they in turn will also be kind and loving toward us in return. But it isn't always the case. And actually, sometimes it can be the case that those who are closest to you, in your own family members, your dearest loved ones and family, sometimes it is in those situations that the greatest sort of anger arises. So sometimes, in a close relationship with friends or loved ones, then sometimes it's easiest in that context to express anger or to become angry. And so often it can be the case that anger comes from somebody who is actually someone who you consider to be near and dear.
Tako kasna konroji mugan kon savi orwa. Ina tako kora tash on the yosaro taika. Guiding forces. Ina beating the forces beating chigwa. What he so no nyela imata na kyo tombo tisam ko de. When ngato problem ji you wina. Whatever problems. Ina yang ko problem te yori problem te le te na konro sagirwa. Ina konro sasate nga ta ni san ro ji to bo ro ji to mo ro ji na sa san ro ji ni sa bi yo yes that pe ka san ta mu ga kong ro sa bi yo ina ko ta la hu
So actually there's a Tibetan saying that is something to the effect of when even though one is angry at a human being, they take it out on their horse. So they whip the horse sort of out of anger toward a human being.
Angry to the person.
Yeah.
And beating the horses.
Angry at a person, but beating the horse. And so actually that is sort of actually more of what he was getting at with the, it can be the case that, for instance, there's some problem or some difficult situation, but then sometimes we take it out on the people who are closest to us. So our anger actually, or our frustration with some other situation then ends up being taken out on our own loved ones or family members.
Oda tiri, tieni da tela karsina ngatota. Katsanta kung shuguri de kitang ke ngatso chi rang dang hian se yarwa, telesomo angu yorwa. Tieni da rang ngone chi samo tambi na rang nyamlen dang na. Ne chi ngone mujik yabo chigu yona. Yabo chingen de ti tango is yabo chigo ta ku is. Tieni de chi ngatso peji yore ko and a chapter work on TV now, young. Kikum Yayo Mari, so magic table, the expensive thing in Mari, special Mari, Ina, which you don't keep beyond the magic Yabochi, Yabochi Latin, Yabochi, Lembo lawyer. Tigana Yiko, Koranke, Majiwa, as a loyalty note, Yayo Mari, is not Kansan Yanating and Matumune, came to me. 지금 힘받았더니 누구 말이요. 예스. 되는 지금 어디 야고 진행 소라더니 너무 태고. 예스.
So there are two ways to learn from this verse. So one is from the perspective of like our own practice or how we should, our own practice in regards to how we treat others. And then in our own practice with regard to the response of the treatment of others. So first, to begin with, to take this advice to heart when it comes to how we treat others, then it is very important to always recognize and appreciate the kindness of others. So those who have been good to us, who have helped us, who have shown us some kindness, it's always important to remember that, to cherish that kindness and to return that kindness whenever we have the opportunity to do so. So those who have been good to us, then we should respond to that goodness in kind. Even when it comes to something sort of insignificant, even when someone, even if somebody has simply offered one a simple cup of tea, it doesn't have to be anything extravagant, not some sort of like expensive gift or something, but just a simple act of kindness, to always take that, to hold that in our heart, and to appreciate, that kindness that we have been shown, and also to have a certain sense of loyalty, knowing that when somebody has been good to us, to cherish those people and to always, treat them well in return. And then, so from our own side, our own practice is to not treat anyone actually in a way that is harmful, or to avoid treating others badly. And instead, and especially in cases where we have been shown, where others have been kind and generous to us, to also return that kindness, or generosity, with a sense of appreciation.
제가 나기다 가서 단다 추념을 지리요로. 근데 추념을 지리면 좀 대화 통해 들라. this dedication 치야나 레이라고. 그래서 진짜 팀들이 지금 대성구도와 단다 뭐 기초밀len 보트리 나오는 요래 팀들이 제공에 이제 코란틴 대화 토바. 다 무슨 대화 토바서는 제 코란을 잘 알던 대화 있는데 지금 초보긴 대화 있는데 영나 대비에 토는 대화 있는데 그다 마지비에 지금 대화와 지금 밑에 맹토바와 어디 지금 맹티 일을 tema 어다 지금 맹티 나베토바 어다 tin데 자면 대화 토 yes tin데 인디 디토라 되니 지금 맞은 대화들라 대화들을 지금 맞아 가르쳐나 뭐와치야 요와 뭐와치야 요래 오남자야 요래 yes 대화 중중기 인비네요. 대화 집이 되는데 저 당하고 benefit 지야라 가르치는 거죠. 저서 심지어 대화 주는 의미는 있어. 갈래가고 그래도 와. 가르치는데 나 산지에 두개로 좀 당기나 산지 두개가 나나메와. 산지 두개가 나나메와. 산지에 두개는 예매와. 지금 가르치는지 코로나된 지 대바요 살라테니 베투게세 대바메 살라요 두게 맞에 방야요 말 얘는요 가르치는고 심지하게 대화 심지한 대화 주는 의미는 산지 두게 되는 이유나요 지 폐하시다 도투고요 산지 두게 되게 고마게 고 lep사텔라 고모티케 didn't take 와 그 근데로 차기도 근데 이제 맞아 대화 가리요와 계획이 대화 지 뭐랑 어때니 지금 상상하고 다 dedication 치되는 많은 바탕이 있으니 前他们就我们的神经病 particular 哇就 top 神经他们就ว่า就ว่า有哦听这个听我听起来奇怪的是
So the miragi penadrawa di penadrato kongso giming ko nayang or kongso ngato ming ko nayang.
말이 막 공소금이 거는 와 다들 그 강사 신 뒤로 나를 좀 개와 진행지 와 can be both
so then also when with regard to how to practice in accord with this verse, one method is through always taking care to make aspirations and dedication for all those beings with whom we come into contact or relationship with. So also this is something that is expressed in some of the songs of Jitsen Milarepa. So whenever there is some fruit or some actual offering that is received, whether it is a thing, a material thing, or some kindness from a helpful individual or friend, or some act of devotion, and even the lack thereof, any sort of connection, through that may be formed with beings, even through hearing their name, coming into contact just by hearing of someone, and likewise through someone having, in the case of, say, for instance, Jitsen Milarepa, having even heard the name Milarepa, that through that connection that is made. That the aspiration that in the example of great masters like Milarepa, the aspiration that is made is that all beings may be benefited, whether they have a positive or negative connection through any sort of connection or interdependence that there is, any beings that we come into contact with in any way, then to make the aspiration or to have to make the dedication that all beings may be benefited, if there is, because as long as there is a connection there, then there is some karmic interdependence. And so really the key is the connection, having a connection. So the compassion of the Buddha is limitless. It's unsurpassed, immeasurable, and impartial, limitless compassion, without any regard for close and distant. So it isn't as though the Buddha has compassion for those who have faith in him and not compassion for those who do not have faith in him. It is not like that. But so the compassion of the Buddha is limitless, impartial, and immeasurable. However, there is this important role that connection plays. There is the karmic connection, the importance of interdependence that occurs through some sort of connection. And so if there's no connection there, then there's not a link that is formed. And so therefore there isn't the possibility for a being who has not made some connection to then be benefited by the Buddha's compassion. And so for that reason, it's so important that we also engage in this skillful means of dedication and aspiration prayers. So that's what we do, for instance, every time we do our dedication prayers, where we dedicate the merit or the virtue to all sentient beings as vast as space, and in particular those in particular with whom we have some sort of connection, some sort of karmic connection.
thế thằng ngã chút đi hiện cái ta rằng số du bộ tăng用na rồi ta rằng thằng đi công ty na giờ sẽ làm khoáng cái làm na gì đấy thế chỉ rằng thì bộ khai sĩ chỉ vì na 건강이 이렇게 보통 부모는 이제 저와 장비나 초양 보다는 이 다른 라 되네 맞어데 양조 아메리카 부분은 이 되네 이제 저와 지그래서 다 간의 지그래서나 배낭아도 다 아마로 제이나 거지기는 요디나 와 부지 권용만으로 차 되네 아마라 동 생명발라 되네 다 가르쳐나면 잘라도 또 되네 지나 되네 아마 되게 더더고 배두고래 나 동소선배 로야 로마래 제가 나이 나한테 잘라도 자송선배 지 로야 로마래 대인도 되네 다동양 샤다 코코냐 바차야 나샤 콜라베 자와진 나자 간리지 타야 타기 지고래다 거지 뇽바다 가두지 뇽데야 삼뇽 뇽바 마차 간리지 그선데 딱 앞에 자와 쇼치는 로와 지 부두부 가세다나 더잠이든 아메리카들 지 자와 치는 로 탑히다 탑히 칸 중지로 어다 더는 이게 이제가서 직초 파야고 치비나 저나 지 노바타야 돼 치아요 is
So, on the other hand, then, as it advises in this, according to this verse here, if someone for whom we have cared as lovingly as our own child treats us as an enemy, if they regard us as an enemy and they really try to harm us, or they do treat us badly, then instead of becoming hostile and angry and returning that harm with harm, instead to intensify our concern, to intensify our love for that individual, to go back, to still look after that person, or to care for that person as dearly as a mother does an ailing child, is the Bodhisattva's practice. So, for instance, if a mother, has a son or a child that she loves very dearly, and if that child becomes mentally ill, if they become, crazy, and they are yelling and screaming and shouting, horrible and hateful words at their mother, and even if they, pick up objects and start throwing them around the house, then, the child who has become delusional because they are ill, because they are mentally ill, the mother is not, most likely in that situation, she's only going to become deeply concerned for her child. So she's not going to, become angry in return, to take it personally, and to treat, be angry and start yelling at her back at her child. But she's going to think, what is wrong? Something is really wrong here. We need to seek medical attention. We need to be, make sure that my child that is able to get better, something, there's only going to be a raised sense of concern in that situation. And of course, the mother is going to do whatever she can, to benefit her child who has become mentally ill. So it is really like this. This is kind of the response that we can have when someone that we have really tried to treat well, in turn views us as an enemy and tries to harm us, instead, or treats us poorly. Instead, to view them, instead of with a mind of anger and a desire to retaliate, instead to view them with the concern that a mother would an ailing child, is the advice here.
서로 누구 땅 용의 제가 팔았더니 참바다 인제 장여 생범비나 이네 그 평상심이 잡아요. 예스. 제가 나기 줌생 카르스는 아주 팔라 민기티에 그래서 팔교 메티 파야 랑 파야 뭐지 저 누구 땅 거요나 그런 레는 봤어. 당기 콘슈가 나기리 그 부부 되게 아마라 누구 땅 거요래. 줌생 카르스는 꼭 보라 녀바치 아니요래. 나타요. tenagi sem tikwares kanza je ngoni pa ya bochi de chorna batani ti metel nyung be na sa chimbo shuji yores to zoda ignore o tiene mare ba shuchim mare bi kin na sa chimbo ji mare bi kin yo de ko ran ba ti indu tini tele na so tele be ji pa du bo ta yo mar ba ti indu tini tele ji be ning ji ji sha ta nyung be na di sha 상기보다 되지네. 냠내 치비나 맞다. 냠내 치비나 냠내 치고레스.
So the practice is to respond to hostility, anger, or negativity with a mind of love and compassion. So actually, if we are able to, somebody treats us poorly, and we're able to practice, bring that on to the path of practice by generating real, genuine love and compassion for them, the benefit of that is inconceivably vast. So actually through, through responding to the negativity of others that is directed toward oneself with patience and love, through that there's really an extraordinary exhaustion of negative karma that occurs. So there's a huge karmic purification that occurs through that. And so the attitude to hold is really the same as this example of a mother responding to the kind of crazy actions of her child that is unwell, because it really actually is no different. When others treat us poorly out of affliction, because their minds are afflicted, they are not well. They are actually, it is being overwhelmed or being motivated by the afflicted mind states is like having an illness. It's like a powerful illness because one cannot see clearly. They're completely blinded by the afflictive emotions that have arisen in their mind stream. And at the root of this is ignorance. Or unawareness. So the fundamental sort of delusional, misunderstanding of reality is really like being mentally ill. It is a form of mental illness. And so when others act out and are hateful or violent or angry, this is really due to the illness that they are afflicted by, which is the illness of unawareness and the other afflictions. And so really the only appropriate response in that situation is really compassion, to have compassion for the suffering of those individuals, and to think, sort of to take, to have sort of mercy or feel compassion towards them, and really think they can't help it. They are ill. They are actually afflicted by illness.
Second is that round on your bars and the round on your bomb, maybe you ye, Najaron can get up China young. Yamashing to Kubi down each
So then the next verse is verse 17, which says, even if influenced by pride, an equal or inferior person treats one with contempt, respectfully placing that person like a guru at the crown of one's head is the bodhisattva's practice. Or an alternative is, even if driven by pride, an equal or inferior being tries to demean me, placing him with respect like a guru at my crown is the bodhisattva's practice.
어다 디엔데 다 디양한테네 지 당기 공수가 나게 그냥네 라소소 게응원은 냐네 칸디지 치고레 수위나 디메지 몰라 입주 당하요 말와 디엔데 지 디네 몰라 디네 지 쿠바 와 몰라 첸동 디고 예스 첸동은 다지 못지 디야 가르쳐나 못이게 데려다 가르쳐 주고 데리 쿠바노로 첸동은 어디 있으면 디야 리스펙트 놓고 예스.
So this verse also, there are these different, and we can take the instructions in different ways. So first, when it comes to our own practice and our behavior and treatment towards others. So first of all, we should avoid demeaning others, you know, whether regardless of, so from our own side, in our own, as part of our own practice, we should really do our best to genuinely treat others with some degree of reverence and respect, to not demean them, to not diminish them, but to really genuinely hold others with great esteem and respect.
제가 나기게 다 대성을 상제게 다 상제 세너리 추념내 제야라 둠바 세야 되는 개친구들 와 둠바 세야 티게 둠바 세너리다 꾸노 세야 되게 좋은도 그러고 제인도 제가 저 꾸노테 가르치나 간디지 부분을 라비나 현지게 상보 기용대 와 강사 수도 수임마 상보요래 멤버요래 와 개인들이 지 상보 기용대들라 따위나 랑가 지 주라 와차 멤버지 샤투 말와 거기 뭐지 또 보여 위나야 랑가 그 상보로 따디위나 그 상보 기용대 상보를 따위나 랑라 와차 샤투 말이라 되네 갈래 아이치 유트냐 주와템 yes so what does it positive
So the Buddha has taught that in the context of Dharma practice, it is really important to value respect, to treat others with respect, to not put ourselves above others. And so the motivation or the way to do that is to really make a point of seeing others' qualities. Because everybody has both qualities and faults. They're both positive qualities and negative qualities there. So it is a choice, you know, what we are going to receive or what we're going to really see in others. And so the Buddha has taught that it's important to always choose to view to notice the qualities and not to pay so much attention to the faults of others. And the benefit of that is that when we choose to see others in a positive and wholesome light, then we don't create the negative karmic imprint in our own mind stream, the negative karmic imprint of criticizing or viewing others negatively. And also the effect of that is that when we when we see others in a positive light, that gives them sort of the ability to, feeling that that reflection, they are able to connect with their own qualities. So they are able to actually express their qualities. Whereas when we project negativities onto others, then often they also feel that, and in turn that causes them to also then act in a way that is more kind of fulfilling one's projections. So it is really actually helpful to others to view them in a generous and light that actually chooses to see their qualities.
어다 개인들이 예스지 변나다 지춤라 아래 되네 지금만에 냠내칭이 되는 송도와 냠내칭이 좋게 지 코랑케 지 문론 근데 지 야보 요비 김센터에 되네 지 나와데 칼레 되네 지 가리는 유인도지나 유예도 그 야보 지금 그 칼레 통구여서와 제가 나의 계지 지금도 지켜서는 되게 제가 나의 나한테 쭉 있으면 소야 지금은 지 타나요 되는 체당 아직 둔로도 소라야 되는 거지 상지 경도 시로 되는 통되고 요서와 좀소라 시리워리 비기닝 보이가 굉장히 유지고 갈래 거지 마다위 나와도 갈래 매와도 차고 요서와 되는 또 그래서 나 되는 지위나 되는 Yes.
And this is really the practice of holding pure view, which has tremendous benefit for our own practice. So when, for instance, there are many songs where Milarepa begins by praising the qualities of the place where he's residing, with sort of really extolling all of the wonderful qualities of the environment where he's dwelling. And so what that does, by choosing to see one's environment as really positive and really pleasant, then slowly our vision becomes genuinely pure, and that the outer container that is the universe or the environment really becomes a pure, beautiful and pleasing place, a pleasing environment or landscape. It becomes, the pure container of a Buddha field. And then likewise, the sentient beings therein, whether they be animals or creatures or human beings, all beings possess the Buddha nature. So actually, in reality, all beings are actually Buddhas. And when we transform our perception in such a way that we are choosing to identify or acknowledge the Buddha nature of the beings around us, then they really become the pure phenomena they manifest the pure phenomena of Buddhas. And so there is tremendous benefit in choosing to view others with this sort of pure mind that really views sees their qualities.
다 행원을 되네 행원에서 못하나 다지 코랑케 지금 나지 가왕케 손데 다지 다 나지 요리 차도 요리 댄섬 요리 어다 tindi지 케고 원래 때네 되네 같이 라라 tindi지 두고 세나디 만배 다야 되네 제가 나이 지금 맞추고 다 가장 공부로 되네 좀 드리죠야 tin디 준비 까불라 tin디 다 삼노당 거와 뭐니 진짜 추념내 지야게 갑자기 라요 뭐제기 줄을 좀 줘고요나 tin디 그 중국은 누가 문도되는 것도 다야 기타기요. 뒤에는 중국요는 그냥 가서 요 상치하려 그래. 와 중국들 약화치하려. 중국 미비나 되면 이 스토어로 오지 요랬다. 그러나 갈라면 조금 우선 말이지. 어 딘디인디 티켓 차이 티켓이 라메 까죠 나. 아마 뭐니 진짜 초초진은 라마차리. 아 디마인비게 지금 가서 바다도 좋고 다른 좋은도 인반도 저런 인기고도 저런 약고도 주에 저런도 싸미는 그냥 가서 너무 패요. 뭐다 약고 쉬스도 너무 나 약고 요사도 그냥 나는 인기고 쉬스도 너무 인기고. 지리지는 꼭 맞지 않거든. 얘는 몇지 좀 주고 있까블라. 지금 가서 연례 집이는 좀 맞지 않거든 말고. 좀 너무 다시 치사지. 좋아. 뒤에다 뒤에 라마한테 갈라고 그러잖아. 라마스 이야기 가슴에 맞지. 랑도 땡년으로 이라고. 뒤에 랑도 땡 말고. 저거. Yes.
So then when it comes to how we should view others, then we should always do our best to see their qualities and to view others with an attitude of genuine respect. And then, of course, when it comes to how others view us or how others treat us, then, very often out of pride, jealousy, competitiveness, others might, disparage us. They might try to demean us. They might try to push us down. They might, just see our faults instead of our qualities because this helps them to feel superior. And so when this happens, then it is important to see it as an opportunity to really practice Dharma. So first, actually, if others see faults in us or they criticize us or demean us, then it's important to really examine, is there something to this? Is there some fault, that I am not seeing, that I am not actually aware of, that is being reflected back to me? And to really look honestly, and if honestly we do see that there is something to it, that there is some fault there, then that is a great opportunity for growth. So we can acknowledge the fault and to confess the fault, and through that process, then it can be purified. And then on the other hand, if upon investigating, we really find genuinely or sincerely that we are blameless, that really there isn't really any fault there, that it is merely the projection coming from outside, then we can be confident, then we can really feel joyful and not bothered by the misperception coming from the outside. We can think, we can stand with confidence in the fact that we know that we are blameless in the situation, that we really are coming from a place of integrity. And so then when we respond to the criticism or negativity directed at us from others in this way, then others actually become like a real spiritual teacher. They become like the Lama, because what is the purpose of the Lama or the spiritual teacher? Well, the spiritual teacher gives us Dharma instruction, and so really, actually, when somebody reflects our faults, that's a really wonderful opportunity. Then they really become like a true spiritual friend, because when our friends and loved ones or our boyfriend or our girlfriend is just always, for instance, like somebody, reflecting nice things to us, say, like, oh, you're so beautiful, you're so wonderful, I just love you, I adore you, no one is as wonderful as you are. Then the only thing that this really does is that it serves to increase our pride. Then we really just become more arrogant. Whereas on the other hand, if somebody points out our faults, then this really serves to diminish our pride. And then they really, that really is like the kindness of a spiritual teacher who is helping us to work on our own mind. So a spiritual teacher is somebody who teaches us, what to adopt and what to discard. And so when we encounter situations like this, then we have an opportunity to really, view the other person as a genuine spiritual teacher.
다 개체조지 가리어서는 기타 다이 고 디펜딩이 고 강사 삼아 찍바 이거 말이 되나요? 피체면은 다 마조리티인데고 선호당비나 중으로 선호당비나 근데 강사 라나스 그 중도 배치 자장갑 한번 하 고요래 자장갑 한번 가서 좀 하 고요. 지 안가 생각이 용어 뭐 쇼침보 등이 단 공수가 나이지. 나지 쇼침보 용게. 저는 시당 쇼침보 용어 도서게. 그렇게 좀 도서더니 배자체 저축급지도 하고 그거. 블람 치료장하래. 또 삼방에 대기요. 개인도 다 디토라 등이 공수가 나이. 지 조건도 지 주문도 처럼 약보도 라비나. 그거는 좀 어때? 그 체른도 나한테 많이 배게 지금 마가 괜찮게 거주 좀 대사야 주 만드니 지샤 라비나 그냥 거기 이제 하고야 놓지 동기요 리스팅이 투서 뭐 방그래 뭐다 강사 참마지 봐 말이 되나요 맞아 중앙 동문에 전에 다 맞아 중요요 같아 맞아 통도요
So, of course, every individual is different. Not everyone is the same. But as a general rule of thumb, it's especially difficult to properly see our own faults. So sometimes we may be able to see, like maybe 50% of our faults, but then there's 50% that are hidden to us or that we don't actually see. And so when we don't see or recognize our faults, then this only becomes a condition for them to increase, for the afflictions in our mind stream to grow stronger. And pride is a big contributor to that. As long as we are prideful, then we're completely unwilling and unable to see what we need to change, what is actually a fault. Especially those who have very strong pride or very strong anger. Actually, they like 80%, even maybe sometimes 100%, they remain completely unaware of their own faults because they're always instead blaming the faults of others or viewing the problems that they have as coming from the outside. So they're very rarely able to actually take responsibility for the negativities in their own mind stream because they just think it's all, a fault outside of themselves. And so really, if we're only surrounded by friends and companions who praise us, who always, tell us that, oh, we're so good and, we're really, they just sort of like fulfill what the ego wants to hear, then this is just going to cause our faults to increase. It really doesn't do us any favors. There's no real service, true service to us if that does. And so in this way, Chimala Karila.
Hmm?
Chima Karila.
That Jima the love your what
Okay, yeah.
the
Mhm.
auntie wants to join your Chapunda.
On the other hand, if our if those around us reflect, our shortcomings and faults, instead of, feeling discouraged or feeling angry in response to that, we have an opportunity to really allow that to enable us to grow, to enable us to diminish our faults and build qualities.
I think that should be la Soviet Ponchi is that the analysis that the watch us on Soviet Ponchi. Soviet Ponchi, not the main such a need of Donji. That young lord, the coup de do dollar.
So then verse number 18 says, though one may have an impoverished life, always be disparaged by others, afflicted by dangerous illness and evil spirits, to be without discouragement and to take upon oneself all of the misdeeds and suffering of beings is the Bodhisattva's practice. Or an alternate translation would be, though I may lack sustenance, be constantly abused, stricken by grave illness and evil spirits, in return to be undaunted and to take upon myself all wayfarers, misdeeds, and ill-being is the Bodhisattva's practice.
That in the Nyamla Kandichi got in that Samsung of Jikendi Nonako. Jurvek Rangi today, Tigana Yiki Jitendi Nala, Jatanga Futa, Proba Siati, Dewotan Chiwochi, Yomari, Tindiji do Sam, telling us a young one joke to me, and yet the Yungu Yorwa. That in Chitana, to some Chitan, the wonder Yungu, that he Lessenary Gahichi. So a gang you do Tigana, Nazaji, Yungiore, Tigana, Buku to Potanga Yorwa. Not a Tambati Yungdua, Saja Kahila, Gahi, Kaza Gersola Yungiore. Young Sajan Gahila, Chulona, which Dao Yuna, T. Chulona, here Kado. T. Javuna. He Yamton Nasaji Leviano. Pochi Kukani Jegang, Jek Tinde, Yungu Yorwa, Lumbanda win at Haku, Yungu Yore. Tigana Yiketa, Kaza Ger, Suzumon, someday, the Yungu. Yes.
So sometimes it can be like this, as the external world or environment is the nature of change. This is samsara. This is the nature of samsara. So samsara is not eternally kind of happy and pleasant experience. And so it is very often the case that somebody can really be afflicted by all sorts of hardship and difficulty. For some, there is the difficulty of being impoverished. Some may have a really difficult time struggling just to get by, and even on top of that condition of great poverty, then they might become really sick. They may actually realize that then they are stricken with a grave illness. And so there's a situation of great hardship and suffering to begin with, and then there's just greater hardship that follows, and so on and so forth. So this is really actually quite common as our experience, and a common experience in samsara. So in some cases, there are external difficulties and hardship, places one may live, in a region that is war-torn or stricken with violence, and there may be, outer natural disasters such as hurricanes, and then in the midst of that, having had one's home destroyed, then also one has a terrible illness. So there can be often really sort of streams of misfortune that ripen all at once, where there's really quite severe hardship and difficulty. This can happen on a collective level, and it can also happen individually.
다 냠냥 간데 지고 이나양 고탄기 휴원의 일이 창문 주르게 그런 일과 맞아버리天天지 지고 휴지 요이나 지고되고 지 고메타와리라 디가 나 얘기 당의 공시원의 일이 지랑 나타나디나 나타와디 고티네 딱게 그런 일 말이 나타될 때는 잘해요. 어디가 나이 그 단다지 빼샤는 팀이 메비나요. 그때 그 딱바랑 이 말이 팀대인들 그녀마지 빼샤 용거로. 팀이 맞아 틀라래. 팀네 라지 담나 롱지 요래 있습니다. 그래서 라지 jet도 가려.
They cross the mountain, there's a valley.
그래. in Florida 요 말고. What in the Lajaga Kaleorwa, Valino Soluji Yorwa. The Tindipe, Lajan Chade, Yorma, Massive. The Uncle Bay. Tanja Chade, loaded Jibono, Tanja Yorma. What in was a Mezena, Jiwatanya, Isia, Kawareda, Monetone, Yamlet, Sing Tombo Ching the Sun, and usually could you can know to Marwa, not the matter bake it out. 주고 있나래, 방고 있나래, 드네지, 공부 있나래, 미마 있나래, 소나 쓰이나야, which 앞에 lon지 되어 있어.
So everything is the nature of change. Everything is impermanent. Times of pleasure and pleasant experiences are impermanent, and times of hardship and difficulty are likewise impermanent. If things are going well, they won't always go well. There will be ebbs and flows. There will be times where, that kind of favorable stream dips into an unfavorable ripening. And likewise, when one is afflicted by illness, this is also temporary. The nature of the duration, throughout the duration of the illness itself, it's not a static, ongoing experience. There are dips, there are ebbs and flows, there are changes throughout the, periods of relief, throughout the course of the suffering of that illness. And the illness itself is not permanent. It is quite possible that at some point that illness we may actually be alleviated of that illness, so we may recover, because that is the nature of impermanence. If we are without financial high financial standing, or if we don't have a lot of wealth, that is not permanent. It can change, and one day we can find ourselves in a situation where there is more money coming in, where we actually have some financial abundance, So there's a saying in Tibetan that once you cross the mountain peak or the mountain pass, the high mountain pass, then below there is always a valley or a meadow. And so often it is the case, and that is what life consists of, a lot of peaks and valleys. And there are always occasions where we can rest and take it easy, where we enter a meadow or a valley, where the situation is a lot, where there's less struggle. There, regardless of the degree of our hardship and suffering, it is always like this. There are always periods of greater difficulty and hardship, and then there are periods of some relief, some more that changes, that hardship then changes into relatively better circumstances, and this is how it is throughout our life, throughout the lifetime of any given human being. So it is never the case that everything is just pure hardship and struggle and difficulty, or that it is pure pleasure and favorable experiences. So people, many, sometimes there are people who have a great deal of wealth, and then they lose all that wealth and they become very poor, and vice versa. It's always the case that our situation is changing, whether, I'm sorry, I don't think he said that actually, that I misread that. So he said, there are always peaks and valleys for everyone, whether rich or poor, whether somebody of, kind of high status, or somebody who is like a political leader or an ordinary person. Everybody has this changing flow of experience that is pervaded by impermanence.
직강이 최대의 까올라 닝톱 그래. 그러와 당가 강이 최소 나라 지구에서래 당가게 당가 지구에 향하여 삼번하고 나나나 나라라게 나도 나산데 데릭도 같은데 손 아요 말에 tankum 시원하게 정말 저래라 이러 근데 이미 고직다 닝톱 뽑아 accept해야 돼 개체물 그래서 나나나 이 자기의 상관 어디는 직다 단다 번져 메위나 예레 번져 라그리 나한테 그래서 되겠지 또 is
so we cannot change nature. We cannot sort of block the natural unfolding of like phenomenal experience. But when we are stricken with a particular difficulty or hardship, it's important to be courageous in the face of that, to really summon some courage or inner strength. So that particularly when things are especially difficult, or when we are stricken with grave illness or something like this. On the other hand, if we when we encounter difficulty or hardship, and we kind of collapse into ourselves and think, woe is me, or why does this happen to me? I suffer so much, or I have this or that problem, and I am the only one, and something is wrong with me, and I am so poor, or I am unhappy, or I am why I am all alone in the suffering of my illness, or having a line of thinking like this really doesn't benefit the situation at all. It really actually will only make it worse. It will just compound suffering on top of suffering. But instead, in the face of real difficulty and hardship, to have a little, to summon a feeling of courage, and to think, everything is impermanent, everything is subject to change. So temporarily in this moment, this is the particular hardship that I am dealing with, that I have been confronted by, but it can change and it will change. And so therefore, to sort of just have an attitude of acceptance, that is what one is struggling with in the current moment, but that it will surely change, and so, if I am sick, so be it, I am sick. If I am without, if I become, financially destitute or poor, then, I accept that situation of poverty. It won't necessarily remain the same. Everything is always changing.
오다 제가 나지게 되네 당가서 주념내 집이네 가라 되네 집야 배나가 나기요나 되네 텔레게와 뭐야요 가르세나 나 나와서 나 나와 tel라 다 나서 나지고 나와 말해 나 동원에 당다 집삼모 땅이나 나차면이 뭐 수지요 말 가시 zammeleng lo chena nachayo chungina nachayo pukchung도 나차요 봐 나차요 근데 인도 집다 나차대요 우체당 제대는 연구요 인도들이 지금 나베네 갈로다 이 나차데 아트링 안 나와도 배야고 충분히 인도들이 다 심지엔다 담지 나차데 차쇼 스니 나차데 참로 지금 나야 그다 심지에 심에 나차도 참로 지금 나와래 인도다디 그냥 나니 심지에 담지 나자 심지에 담기는 나자 많아요 담지 많은 자야 어디 담에 잡지 나자 차로 어서 어디니다 대체적인 쪽으로 지발이 되네지 오다 아직 단다 번져도 강이요나 제가 나이 zammelengding 하나 강이요래 강이면게 가지요 제탄고 가서는 제탄 번져서야지 강에서야 좀 더 바라고 더 바래 더 바인데 밀란 뭐보이나 밀란 뭐보고 아 대인들이 지 배하고 좀 방비나 대인들고 지금 너가 여기 너가 강대이 지금 당근 렉스야 다 추념을 지내지 있는 마음이 렉스요 말이 근데 다 대 강에 지금 이게 지다 스미간이 요다 담이 세도 쇼서 뭐다 되게 오남지않아 지금 조 가서는 스미 힘발아요 강에 시토그레 이네요 release money 같이 있으면 장학감이 여차로 yes
So it's really important when we do encounter, really severe hardship or difficulty, periods in our life where we're really confronted by something, that's really quite a quite sort of severe form of suffering, such as grave illness or loss or any type of hardship, really, then to have an attitude toward that difficulty or hardship that allows it to become a cause for generating virtue, for actually causing the wholesome qualities to increase. So for instance, if we are sick, instead of sort of lamenting our own suffering and really feeling, so alone in our illness, in the suffering of our illness, instead to recognize, to use it as a way to feel the suffering and pain that so many beings are experiencing, that so many beings are are going through, because we're definitely never alone in our suffering, because there are so many beings who are suffering, and often, you know, in a much more, you know, to a much greater extent even than what we may be going through ourselves. And so when the causes and conditions are there, then one may encounter something that is really tremendously challenging, such as grave illness. So in the experience of that illness, you know, through feeling the suffering of that sickness, then using that experience as a way to relate with the pain experienced by many beings who are afflicted by all forms of illness. So many beings suffer from all sorts of illness, especially, of course, right now, what we see going on in the world with the pandemic, but also through many other forms of illness. There are many who are old who suffer from grave illness. There are many who are young who suffer from grave illness. And so when through the experience of illness, we identify or empathize, we really understand the pain and suffering of sentient beings, then we can turn our suffering into a skillful means of accumulating vast merit. So when we, through experiencing suffering, instead of really lamenting our own pain and hardship, when we say, today, may this pain that I am going through, may this hardship and difficulty that I'm experiencing, that is most definitely the experience of so many sentient beings. Countless sentient beings are afflicted in the same way that I'm afflicted by this pain or this illness, and many even to a much greater extent than this. How difficult, how painful it really is. May no sentient being have to experience this kind of pain. May the illness and difficulties and hardships of all sentient beings be purified. May they all become free of all types of suffering, such as this. Through my own experience of suffering, may all sentient beings be alleviated from suffering. And so when we make a powerful, sincere aspiration prayer like that, it really is very powerful. It's possible that it may actually clear away the hardship and difficulty for other sentient beings, and also most definitely it causes the suffering that oneself is experiencing to diminish. And same with poverty, you know, the difficulty of financial hardship or poverty. Actually, everybody is suffering from poverty, really, because the poverty comes from desire. So it actually is, you know, the mind that desires to have more, that is really what the experience of poverty is. And so even in the case of many people who actually have a lot of wealth, who have a lot of money, even still, often it is never enough. They always want more. And so that is actually a form of poverty. And so it is often never enough, you know, no matter how much wealth one is able to acquire. And so as we practice, you know, even if we ourselves feel that we are struggling financially, and this is causing us suffering, to make the aspiration that no beings may have to experience the pain of poverty or the struggle of financial hardship or difficulty, then it brings our own suffering onto the path of practice, and it becomes an accumulation of virtue.
Tapi aspiration saya perte senari tak gunung tepe shocking borwa. One dekat ada baca ya de kicang guru. Pernah tanda lujuji yo, lujuji tu dunia ushuina, lujuji kelah macam gaya kita that don't scenario, you tell a Kashu Slavina, Emma Ombara Labure. Young Gasheke, Zawo Pomo Yes.
So really that which enables aspiration prayers to really be endowed with power is the degree or the sincerity of the motivation behind it. So when there is really pure and sincere motivation, then by making such aspiration prayers, there can be just a tremendous purification of negativity that occurs. And there are a lot of stories that exemplify this. And of these stories, for instance, there is the story of Pema Obar, or also known as Zawo Bumo.
Dan Zawo Pumoti, Puji Imbadi, Amajigla, Puji Yori, Amajik, Puji Detini, Korang Choa, Pawadi, Yamzo Ganon, Nulangando, in a Korashesonwa. The Sheson, the Amatigita, Chi Putela, that Jatanko tradition, the Yaki tradition in the Winside Pindu. Luxote Karsana, Pavile Karele Buyona, Amikleka, Mother to Pukleka Lego Yorwa. Yena Yatini, Tati, Tondo, Tungo, or Inatinating. Kaduina, Ameke Amalia Ketcha Tichitini, Pavile Karela, Amik Hibadi Laburo, or Sumajamia, Basania, Bosania, Tatane, or Laburi. In Taco Cavando, also. Cuba. That is not detail. And that's the Kosoando. I'm making about the Latin. Which you wanted to get the Marie Laborina, finally, Calabos, Magic, Marie Martini, Chorapali Lekati, Monepali, Jamzon Ram, Nurulangando, Tindiki Lekari, Slav, yes.
Is Zawo Senate?
Zawo Pomola, that you can't go to do.
Really, Hakos on any on sick day, they Ming indicate that Zawo, we do not the Ming Jabo.
In Zawo Sena, Chetan Zawo Sena, to one over Zawo Pomola. Chetan could pretty poem and
So the story of the Zawo Pumo, actually, so this is the name of, like it means something like the nice girl or the friendly girl or something, but then actually this was the name that was given to the boy when he was young, because it was kind of connected with trying to protect him from the fate of his father. So his father was a merchant who would sail to islands of jewels, and then bring back the bounty and sort of sell these fabulous jewels that he would find on these far off islands. And so in the Indian tradition of the time, it was always kind of a family, a line of work, whatever one's line of work would be kind of inherited by one's father. So whatever line of work it was that one's father and his father and back, generations engaged in, then that would become the line of work for the child, for the son. And so, so this is kind of an old, long story, but to sort of make it more brief, and many of you obviously have already heard it many times, so when this boy, Zawo Bumo, became of age to start working, his mother didn't want to tell him what line of work his father had been in, because his father had died at sea, and so she was worried that the same might happen to him. And so she she lied and told him, first, that his father did one line of work, and then he would discover that actually that wasn't the line of work that his father did, and then he would come back. So, she told him at one point that his father sold incense, at one point that he sold thread, and every time he would go to the market, and he would try to, he would start, selling these goods, and then somebody inevitably would tell him, hey, that's not what your father did, that's not your family's line of work. Why are you doing this isn't actually the traditional work of your family. And so then he would go back and he would tell his mother, okay, I was told that this isn't actually what our family did, and so tell me, what was it that my father did? And then she would tell him something else, and then he would discover that that wasn't actually what his father had done. And so then one day he was told, your father was a merchant who went to islands of jewels and found jewels. So he was actually a jewel merchant. So this was the line of work that your father had.
Tene Koraya Amezala Nota Amachuranke Tinga Tambola Gimindo in Amonation Tene Palate Chiptine Nobu Lembandong Tini Sades Late Amikua de Tate Inatati Chonli Catelequa Kayo Maris Matsumbra Mobola Jamsuna Mutsum Shindo Dores Tin Chona here and Toba Mendos Chonga Yo Mari Latin Coke Mare Maitati Jingato Castle tradition brought and Chicho Maris, Tending my own rule out and prepare no Chaton Chine. Tenin Dove Gala, then I make it in Unita, then here something, Jikambala, then June Ayo Maris. The Matan is Nepoji, Tanga to pay my Tashiba, the rule and Roger is in a Chorampe, the Consude Choramoyada, Tenin Malabe. Mataya Tamahivalis, Chichitin, Arochilla, with the young Jamaic Matan within it, Amana, Jashu, Marty, Chimalis.
So then when he confronted his mother about this and said, I know what line of work my father was in, and you haven't been honest with me all this time. Why is that? And so his mother said, okay, it is true. So now your father was a jewel merchant who would sail, sail to islands in search of jewels. But I didn't want to tell you this because it's very dangerous. Your father died at sea, and for many generations, many sailors have died at sea. And so I really, didn't want you to suffer the same fate. And so please, even though that is what your father did, please don't do the same thing. And so then the son said, no, I'm not going to break the tradition. This is what our family has done for generations. This is my destiny, I must go. And so then, he prepared to set off to sea, and to travel to these islands in search of jewels. And as he was preparing, his mother was just completely distraught. And before he departed, she was sobbing, and she grabbed onto his leg and said, please don't do this. Don't go. You're my only child, my only son. And he became frustrated. The son became frustrated, and he thought, this is not auspicious for you to be crying and sort of making a big fuss, making a scene. You should be supportive and happy that I'm going out to sea. And so, why are you doing this? And he became frustrated, and he kicked her, he hit her and kicked her off of his leg. And she fell to the ground, and this is how he left. And then he just took off.
At the end of the day, Koranke, Jatanda, Luju, say, Damanda Yorwahina, the end of the day, Jatan Koran, Jamsu, choosing the shake, Tanga Hilana, Koran, Hombre, Laburi, Tanga Hilana, 네 거기 마종네 그런 배 신강지 강나 신 월제 강자네 네 알렌지가 레버리 러버리 강다 강이냐면 다 되네 알렌 몽고지 레버리 타마디 걔네 기타 소링 지리 앞에 가블라들이 그런 네 작 강바 현황 저원도 지금 이렇게 작 강바들이 딱 그런지 키 알렌틴이 너무 토요서로 저기 좀 포조는 거야 요 말이 슬라부요 이내 거다 직 철원으로 포조를 마음만도 도와 다 포조 가진도는 든 소링담다 통구요 와 근데 타마디 작강바티나 딱 한다 레버리스 작강바티나 레드티니 얘네 디나를 심점배 동이 섬지며 저한테 이거 딱 작한다 팬을와 레 또 디네 키트니 제지되는 야 일단 lun골 lun골로 다니 작게 키트니 콜로 디니 마 오가나 마사 디니 레버터 돈로로 디니 그 텔레아피가 다 가르치기를 근데 가르치기요래서 그런 깨져 TV가 알았더니 데이터 면도서 가르치는 등이 양도요래 라비니 보다 면도서 아마라 동요래스 디니가 아마 동비키레 되니까 양도를 때는 그런 배 현황을 기여로 모니터링을 하다시다 딜라 그 만돌라비오리 기다 간들 레버리스 안 되는 레이키티니 아마도 보통은 지금 배 개인적으로나 현황이 있어.
So actually, there are a lot of variations in this story. It's told, in a variety of different ways, and in some versions, the son went out to sea, and the boat. There was some problem, and the ship did sink, and he died. And then what followed kind of happened through his experience after he had died. In other versions, he didn't die when the ship sank, but he grabbed onto a floating board, and it went through a series of experiences floating, from island to island. And so he arrived at one island, and he encountered the people there who said, who told him, whatever you do, don't go to the south. Don't go towards the south. But he sort of had this feeling like I need to go to the south. He sort of even though he was told this, he felt like he needed to go south. And so then he would get to the next place, and sort of the same type of thing would happen. And then finally he ended up on this one island where there was a giant iron building. And there were, many sort of much wailing and screaming of, people suffering inside this building. And so he then ended up entering the building and saw what was going on there. And it was just this horrendous scene where there were all of these fans of blades that were above, all of these different individuals, and then the fans would slowly descend and then sort of chop up the heads of the beings beneath them. And so he asked, why such a horrendous scene? What is it that these people have done, that is deserving, such a horrible punishment? And so then he was told, or he heard that that all of these beings who were being chopped up by these fans had beaten their mothers, that they had, like abused and beaten their mothers, and that this was the karmic result of that. And so then at that moment he thought, oh my goodness, that is what I have done. This is obviously my karmic fate. And he felt extreme terror and regret all at once, deep in his heart.
Tindi gana tene keji jela korang te samnojin corporates lam santega o ta nga tindi jinya le ni ba sabari sha tindi ta nga tindi dungi nya re sha sta ati dungi te kon doya te ta higo marwa timedi hina ko samnoji da nga ti ko re mu sta nga na yi ke amma dugo ta nya kase yo sta ti dugo ta nya changman bindi ki dungi nya Ti indu ta train nga dungi nya ne ta nga na yi ke ji ama dubo ta ni dungi ke chap na wo cheji ta so dungi me yung sho sta train ne dungi chasa ne len ge sta nga na yi ama dubo ta ni ke le sa de ne chame dungi nga na nya sho sta nga la ti indu ta nga la ya ho sho nga nya sho yin ya nga na yi ke ji ama dubo ta ni dungi me yung sho ning takwa ne ning go rubi ki ne ni mona de ja ta ma dungi nya ne sa la pa dungi thang le lo chi ji ni ji chi yes.
And so then at that moment, there was this voice that resounded from the sky that said, may the wheel be lifted from the heads of those where it was spinning, and for those where there was no wheel before, may the wheel descend. And at that moment he looked above and he saw that even though he hadn't been standing beneath one of these metal fans of blades, he saw that now one was above his own head and it was approaching, closer and closer to chopping him up. And so at that moment, what actually entered his mind was, now this is the karmic ripening for having beaten my mother, for having harmed my own mother. And there's nothing that can be done about it. And I surely am not, clearly I'm not the only one who has done these kinds of negative deeds. There are so many who, like me, have mistreated or abused their mothers. And they are now suffering the same terrible fate, how much suffering there is, in the world. And so then what ended up happening is he gave rise then to great compassion. And he made a really, powerful aspiration prayer from the bottom of his heart. And he thought, yes, I will endure this agony that I have created the causes for, but may it take the place of all of the suffering and hardship of sentient beings who have to suffer the same fate, who have unknowingly done harm to others, or have harmed others without understanding the karmic consequences. Those who have mistreated their mothers and now have to suffer this terrible agonizing fate. So may my own pain and suffering take the pain and suffering of all sentient beings. And at that moment, having made that really sincere aspiration prayer, from the bottom of his heart.
다 되니 뭐는 저거 대가라면 되니 그게 대가라면 되니 다 작 콜로 되니 박스 자라 뭐 나나 yes 되니 다 저 가르치는 거다 운용해야 돼 단다디 정도다 그 스토리 트루티는다 트루티 마이나다 강다니요 노동 인보대 갈라고 여러분이나 근데 운용도 되네요 그래서 운용 된지 이유는 누가 깨지기 장로야 이제 어떻게 지지더니 그런 얘기라 아마 이게 아마
So at that moment where he had that very pure kind of compassionate aspiration prayer for others, at that very moment, the fan of blades lifted up into the sky. So it came just close to descending upon his, like chopping up his own head. But then at that very moment, it lifted up into the sky and retreated, into space. And so this is because of the power of his pure motivation and his great compassion, his great compassionate prayer. And so whether this is a true story or not, what it is exemplifying is the power of aspiration and pure motivation. So if there is a really pure motivation based on compassion like this, and powerful aspiration prayers are made, then instantaneously this has the ability to purify countless negativities, or to fully purify and exhaust suffering.
Okay.
There's no questions.
Okay, so we go to the dedication.
But actually, there was a prayer request. If you don't mind, a friend of ours, Choki, she requested a prayer for her father. He's having extensive open heart surgery this Tuesday, August 11th, and her family and herself would be most grateful if you will all hold him in your prayers. The surgery is going to begin at 7:30 a.m. on the 11th, and he will be under anesthesia for 6+ hours and then in the ICU for 5 to 7 days. So if you would just hold him in your prayers, she would appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you. So 24. So we'll do the dedication prayer on page 24 of the prayer book. By the virtues collected in the 3 times, by myself and all beings in samsara and nirvana, and by the innate root of virtue, may I and all beings quickly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, precious enlightenment. May the teachings of the great Dragumpa Ratna Shri, who is omniscient, Lord of the Dharma, Master of interdependence, continue and increase through study, practice, contemplation, and meditation until the end of samsara.
Thank you. Have a good day.